Hola, bienvenidos a Diálogos, soy Facundo Guadaño y en esta especie de lado B de Diálogos, hoy nos encontramos de nuevo yendo, y vale la redundancia que nunca vale, en lo que es el Cine B. El Cine B que tiene, semánticamente es vago hablar sobre Cine B, pero son esas películas de culto que nos dejaron una impresión particular cuando las vimos. Estuvo acá el legendario Lloyd Kaufman, estuvo Victor Maitland acá, y hoy nos encontramos con J.R. Bookwalter, el director de cine norteamericano. ¿Cómo estás? How are you, J.R.?
I'm very good. How are you? Thanks for having me.
Well, I know J.R. Since I was 17 years old by watching this amazing movie that is Robot Ninja. We're going to show some clips of Robot Ninja, the Spanish version, and I'm going to do it on purpose because for watching Robot Ninja, you have to have this certain mood, you have to have this certain atmosphere, like creating this sense of dread and like bizarre nostalgia. So 11 years ago when we talked, you were like I don't know if it's the proper word, but reluctant to talk about Robot Ninja. You didn't want to talk about it, but now you want to do it, and a Blu-ray edition came up. What happened in these 11 years?
Well, the biggest thing that happened is I think in 2017, the original cut negative of the movie was discovered, and which allowed me to go back and completely restore the movie and fix all of the things, all of the problems that I had with it. I mean, there's some problems you can't fix, like story and plot and acting or whatever, but I was able to finish the movie the way that I wanted to, so that it was something that I could then be proud of. And that's what we've done. The restored version is really the only version that I would love anybody to see, because the original release version was plagued with many problems.
Yes, but the VHS version has its own magic, and I don't know why. I really don't know why, but it was worldwide released, and it became like a cult hit in Argentina. I don't know why did that happen. So I don't know if there's any explanation from your side, like it was because of the distribution, some marketing thing, some fan base. What happened to be like a cult massive thing, this Robot Ninja worldwide?
I mean, I suppose part of it's probably because it's a very unique movie. I mean, that's the one thing I can say about it. It's not, there's really very few other movies that are like it, and especially movies that I've made. It's got a lot of blood and guts, so I'm sure that certainly contributed to it. But it's not just Argentina. It's a cult movie in Germany and in Italy and Spain, and I mean, it was released to all these countries where I would have never imagined that it would have been released. I think it's probably, next to The Dead Next Door, probably was released in more places than any of my other movies. So it's quite amazing, really. I don't know if I could put my finger on it. It's just it's its own unique animal, I guess. Well, this is the restored version that you're looking at, yeah.
Yes, this is the restored version. I tried to make it like this is a very hilarious scene. Like, these hands are worth like $10,000.
Yeah,
You know,
Marty Call, the horrible artist played by Scott Spiegel.
Well, first of all, you were like, well, I really want to talk about the Easter eggs that we can see. Like, there are some, well, like some mentions to your previous movie that was The Dead Next Door, and some, I will say, like some influences from the Terminator. When I always say Michael Todd. I
Yes.
really don't remember the character name, but I remember the
Leonard Miller. He plays the lead character. Yeah, Leonard Miller is his character.
Miller. And he was like opening his arm. That was really like the Terminator. And some of the Toxic Avenger. I like some scenes, and some Evil Dead. So what were your main influences when you were writing Robot Ninja?
Well, the funny thing about the scene that you referred to with the arm surgery being like the Terminator, I actually had not seen the Terminator at that point. And everybody kept telling me after the movie was finished, like, oh, this is like the Terminator. And I'm like, what do you mean? And then I, of course, went back and watched it. Like, oh, I had no idea. So that just seemed to be the thing that he should do. I don't know why, but anyways, but the other influences that you mentioned, of course, yeah. I mean, comic books were, of course, the primary number one influence. I was a comic book nut growing up, and I had kind of it had kind of fallen aside over the years, my love of comics. And then around the time, I guess, Frank Miller did the Dark Knight series and things like that, then that had sort of reignited my interest. And that was right around the time that movie was being made. So, and the Tim Burton's first Batman movie was about to come out literally, I think it came out 2 weeks after we were done shooting Robot Ninja. So that was it was everywhere. I mean, you would go to comic book conventions or anywhere, and that was the big news at the time. So all those inspirations came about. But I just, my thing was when I made it, I think when it was first pitched to me, because it was executive producer David Dakota that came up with the title. He's like, I have this title, Robot Ninja. And I kind of cringed, and I'm like, well, I don't want to make a movie about robots or ninjas who are robots or vice versa. So I knew that wasn't what I was going to make, but I thought something interesting could be done with that title. That was the challenge, really, is like, how can I make a cool movie with this title? Because to me, the title was like, ugh, I have no interest in making a movie with that title. But I wanted to make another movie. At this point, I had made Dead Next Door and it was finished, but it hadn't been out yet. So I was desperate to just make something. So I took on the challenge of doing it and tried to make it my own. I was like, what can I do with this title that would be interesting to me as a filmmaker? And that was ultimately the challenge of making it. But the influences are all over it. Yeah, I mean, it's the doctor wears it's played by the same actor, Bogdan Pesek, and he wears the same hat that he wore in the Dead Next Door. Of course, the funny thing is Robot Ninja was released first and nobody had even seen Dead Next Door yet, but more people have now seen Dead Next Door than Robot Ninja, so everybody gets the connection there, I guess. But I think all my movies have been influenced by just whatever I'm into. I pull from everywhere and try to just kind of make it my own thing. So
but you were very, very young when you filmed Robot Ninja and Dead Next Door. For Robot Ninja, I guess that you had 23 years old. You were
probably, yeah, because I started Dead Next Door. I had just turned 19 when I started Dead Next Door, and that took about 4 years. And then Robot Ninja came right after that. So probably, yeah, I think I was 23.
Well, and probably the cast was older than you.
Yeah, I mean, most of the crew was my age, but yeah, definitely, Don Pesek, who played Dr. Goodnight, he was older, and of course we had already worked together. And I think probably, the Floyd Ewing, who played the police officer, he was older as well. But again, he came straight from Dead Next Door as well. So it wasn't as imbalanced as the Dead Next Door was. Literally, like, there were a few people that were younger than me that worked on that, but everybody else was much older by a mile. And we had people all the way from 11 all the way to in their 60s, I think, on the crew and cast. So it was a huge.
Yeah, but it's not. But it is not like if you had like a millionaire budget. So how is like being with such a low budget and trying to being the head of a team that has to do this movie? That this is like a subdivision of the question, but like how the actors, how the cast, the crew were making sense of this movie. It was like some bizarre thing that they took it as a joke or something, like this is going to be strange, this is going to be like a classic B movie. How was it? How was like being the head of it and trying to make sense for the whole crew?
I think the being that it was our second movie and most of the people had worked on the previous movie, there had been such a gap between the two, because Dead Next Door had been shot several years before that. I think everybody was just excited to be doing it again. And it was sort of like a reunion, most of us. I mean, we really didn't do an audition process. I think we did a few little auditions, but it was mostly like, oh, we know this person can play this part, this person can play that. I mean, because the thing about Robot Ninja compared to Dead Next Door was we had no time. Like, it was literally like the deal was made, I want to say in March of 1989, and we were shooting in June of 1989, and it was in video stores by December of 1989. So there was just no time to think about anything. So I literally wrote the first draft of the script in 2.5 days straight. I stayed up all day and all night, which explains a lot probably of the movie, in my opinion, because I was probably in a dreamlike state through most of it. But it just, everything happened really fast, and we didn't have a lot of money. I mean, Dead Next Door by comparison was luxurious because we had a bigger budget and it was spread over a longer period of time. This movie was done in a very compressed amount of time for a very fixed amount of money, which was, I think we had $15,000 to make it, and I got paid, you know, a few bucks above that, and then there were some lab costs. So really, probably all in, this movie was no more than $25,000 all in, and shot and edited and finished on film, which, I mean, you couldn't even do that today. It would be impossible, or nearly impossible. So, I mean, but I think the atmosphere on the making the movie, everybody was, you know, I mean, the first draft of the script was very well received. Everybody kind of got it, what I was going for. And, you know, there was no problem there. Everybody was behind it. And while we were shooting, like I said, it was a reunion atmosphere. We were all just happy to be, you know, doing it again. It wasn't really until I started cutting the movie together that I realized, oh, this isn't really what I wanted necessarily. I didn't get everything that I wanted. And then with all the post-production problems, by the time it came out, I was sort of embarrassed to give it to anybody, because it was just like not the, you know, it just, there were problems with the picture, problems with the sound. We had done all this kind of cool lighting in a lot of scenes, and all of that had just been, the lab just kind of squeezed all of that out of it. So that was really, it was a bummer in the end, but we moved very quickly into another movie, Skinned Alive, which I just produced. And so we didn't really have time to think about it. So everything just happened fast. That was my biggest lesson that I took away from Robot Ninja. Is it was a complete, you know, 180 from Dead Next Door. I had to just sort of learn how to do everything on the fly and not really think about it too much. You know, it was just going to be the movie.
So you were initially embarrassed about that movie, and you didn't want to present it to anybody.
Well, from a technical aspect, I mean, I don't think it at the time, I don't think it hit the ambitions that I had for it. I don't think everything that I wanted to accomplish with it that I was able to do, and a lot of that has to do with the time and the schedule. And I thought that I had everything that I wanted, and then when I started cutting it together, I was like, well, this isn't necessarily the movie I wanted to make. And then I thought, well, we'll try and do the best job we can, you know, with the sound work and everything. And that didn't really work out. You know, I was never happy with the sound mix. And then we sent it off to the lab in California to finish the picture and sound, and they screwed everything up. And then it was really just like something that I just was disowned, essentially. I mean, I would poke fun of it in my other movies. There was always like, people thought that I liked the movie for a long time because there was always be scenes with some character in that other movie watching Robot Ninja. And it wasn't because I was so enamored with the movie. It was because in my mind, I was just like paying some sort of penance for the sin that I had committed, I guess. I was just felt like, we'll just, you know, I should have probably just put it away and not even worried about it. But like you said, it was very well distributed, and little did I know at the time, because we didn't have social media, we didn't have the internet and all that. There were pockets of people in all these other countries that had very fond memories of seeing the movie. And then I kind of felt bad, because I'm like, well, here I'm telling people that I disowned it, and they're looking at me like, why? You know, but it's different when you're the guy that made it. You have, you know, but all of that is sort of, like I said, and now I've made my peace with that. And I'm actually very proud of the movie. I mean, it has flaws like all movies do, and there's things I wish I could have done differently. But from a technical aspect, it's exactly it's beyond actually what I would have hoped to have done.
So you weren't aware of your fan base?
Not really. I mean, I think when it came out a couple times in Germany, and Germany's a country that Dead Next Door was very popular in. So I knew I would hear from people, you know, as the internet started coming in, then I made more aware of it. Even when I was doing, before I had done the restoration work, there was a fellow in Mexico who used to write me all the time, and had been released there, and he was a big fan of the movie, and he kept saying, oh, if you do a sequel, I'd like to give you some money to help make it. And at the time, I was like, oh, sequel, no, never. It was like, what are you thinking? This would be the horrible idea. And it turns out he wound up being the guy who we did a comic book adaptation. He's a comic book artist. His name's Alex Sarabia, and he wound up being the one that convinced me to do a comic book adaptation of it when we did the Blu-ray. So there's actually a comic book of Robot Ninja as well. So which made sense to me. It's a movie about comic books, so why wouldn't you do it? But it's just funny how people just would come out of the woodwork and that would be the movie. You know, it had screenings and stuff overseas, and people would send me pictures, you know, email me pictures or whatever, and I'm just like, well, I don't really get it, but okay. I'm glad people are watching it. Of course, now I want anybody, you know, whoever I can get to watch it. I try to. It's not a movie for everybody. It's not a what I would call an easily accessible movie. You know what I mean? Because it asks a lot of the audience. You know, just the fact that he's not a superhero. You know, it's sort of an anti-superhero movie, which I think in some ways now makes more sense than it did at the time that I made it, because we're being bombarded with so many superhero movies that I think people would like to see something that's sort of the opposite. Like, oh, what would it more realistically be if somebody went out and tried to be a superhero? So that was the gist of the movie at the time, but I don't think anybody got it at the time. I mean, I think later now it makes more sense, but
and maybe today there's a biggest ground, let's say, like a bigger or marketplace or awareness even in the audience, like for like appreciating this kind of B movie, like because there's a revival of the Toxic Avengers. It's going to be released with with Hollywood stars.
Big budget remake. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And you know, in the meantime, if we go back a few years, we have in the mainstream media people like Jackass or something like that. That is like this revisiting the B movies or the B movie style, the B movie humor or aspect of the way of how a B movie analyzes the world. That is a quite big topic. So I think that now the ground is like you know, the marketplace is going to accept something more like Robot Ninja. I don't know if you share that vision.
Well, I mean, I gotta be honest with you that when I made the movie originally and it came out, it was a very painful experience. It was the only one of my movies to ever be reviewed by Variety, which is a industry trade magazine in California, and they just mutilated it. And then Fangoria magazine reviewed it and just slaughtered it, like that I should be ashamed and it's the worst thing that they'd ever seen. And then I to pour gasoline on that fire, I went and wrote them a letter, you know, disagreeing with many of their points or whatever, and then they just laid into me again. So I kind of learned my lesson. It's like, oh, I'm never going to do that again. You know, you just accept the reviews and move on. But at the time, it was a painful, because it wasn't just the reviews. I think even the people that I knew that were seeing it were just like, oh, this is dreadful. Why did you even make this? You know, it's just like, it was not a good experience for me. And like I said, I retreated into producing a movie for John Kilo, who wrote and directed Skin Alive. So I kind of just moved on to the next thing, and then, you know, just tried to keep forging ahead and just, you know, but at the time it was a lesson. It's what we call in the industry a sophomore slump. You know, when somebody makes something, their first thing is pretty good, and then they make something that's really bad. That's what that refers to. So that was my second time at bat, and at the time it was 3 strikes. You know, you're out, kind of thing. So
yeah. Yes, but something that one let's say from a superficial view will say is that the movie behind the movie has a lot of effort behind, because you actually composed the soundtrack of it.
I did, yes. Yep.
If I'm not mistaken, and it sounds maybe like in this Thomas Dolby thing, or Gary Newman maybe in the opening titles. I don't know what you were listening by that era, and I don't know how was the composing process? Because maybe it took like 1 day, or it took like a month. I really don't know by by that time, without any computer.
I actually had a computer. I had a Commodore Amiga 500, and that's what the
Mhm.
titles were done on at the time, and that's what I did all the sequencing of the music. The music was actually a very painful process because I had more time to do The Dead Next Door. This again, like, you know, everything was schedule based. You know, the Cinema Home Video had given me the money, and they were putting it out on a certain date, so I had to deliver it by that certain date, and everything, because it was shot on film and finished on film, you know, we had that process takes a little longer. So, you know, while they were doing some of that stuff, I was able to do the post-production work. But the music came very slowly because I sat down and I'm like, I don't know what to do with this. Like, what, you know, so I went for more of an atmospheric kind of sound, but I'm not like a trained musician. You know, when I did the score for The Dead Next Door, I had to lobby for it. You know, at the time, Bruce Campbell was overseeing the sound mix, and you know, I think Sam Raimi wanted me to get somebody else to score it, and it was only when I played some of the tracks that I had done for them that they finally said, okay, we'll let the kid try it and, you know, see how it goes. But by Robot Ninja, that was part of the deal, is that because there was no money, I couldn't afford anybody else to score it. It was all fell on my shoulders. But I was so beaten down probably from the editing process that by the time I got to do the sound, I don't feel like I put 100% effort into it. But with that schedule sort of looming over my shoulder, I was like, okay, I just have to, you know, come up with something. I need to. So a lot of it just sounds like atmospheric noise. But like you said, Thomas Dolby, you know, there was tons of electronic stuff. I, you know, was a big fan of Talking Heads, Wall of Voodoo. I mean, any kind of 80s music like that. There was a lot of influences with that. I'm not sure that any of that showed in the end result, but there's a few tracks that I really like. I like the opening theme song and stuff like that. I mean, some of it is just, like I said, electronic noise is what I would call it, but it
Yes,
wasn't exactly
and you know,
what I wanted. But it fits. I mean, it makes the movie.
yeah.
It makes it adds to the bleakness. You know, you already have this bleak movie about this, you know, guy going through this, you know, awful experience trying to be a superhero, and I think looking back on it now, I think it actually fits the movie.
And actually, well, two things that you're mentioning: bands or artists like Stan Ridgway, Wall of Voodoo, or something like that. No one knows by like today, and that they were huge back in the 80s. And well, I have to say, like, to pay respect to them, like the first Wall of Voodoo, the first two albums of Wall of Voodoo are like are totally underrated, and they are great. So I have to recommend those.
Yeah, for sure.
And Thomas Dolby, even though he still plays, it was great, and he still is. But with that said, how was the composing time? It was like I have to do this with this schedule that you mentioned. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days. How was it? How was the mastering? How was the edition? Or it was just like you said, like I put like a drum machine, a keyboard, and that's it. How was it?
Well, that was always the tricky thing, because we had, at the time, I had part of the deal of making this movie, and there were going to be 2 other movies after it, was that we had Cinema Home Video had invested in a 16-track sound studio. Now, at the time, this is the old reel-to-reel tapes. You know, everything was analog, and you would put time code on one track of the audio, and then everything would sync to that. So it was a very frustrating process, because you had to feed that time code into the computer, and then it was always a challenge to get the timing down of, you know, what you were doing against what the picture needs. You know what I mean? It's like, it's not all just 4/4 time or what, you know, it's that part of it. The logistical and technical part of it was always very frustrating, because what I wanted to do maybe didn't always match with what was on the screen. You know, you get kind of a groove going, and then it's like, oh wait, they got to change for this mood or that mood or whatever. But I had an office where all this sound studio was set up. And I think, if I remember correctly, the biggest challenge really was just, I had another guy named Mike Render who was building the sound effects at the time, and he was going to do the mix for the movie. So he was in there either at night or during the day, and then I was in there when he wasn't. So it was kind of 24/7 round the clock kind of thing. I had to score around the time that he was doing all the sound effects and all that kind of work. So it was more just, when you're working on that kind of schedule and you're sitting there and you've got, what you have to do, and you need so many minutes of music, the movie's so long, it becomes like the pressure's on to like, okay, I just have to produce something, even if it's not great. I have to, there has to be some music here. It's either that or I got to come up with something else. So I think that was more of the frustration, I guess, at the time. Although, like I said, about half of that score, I feel pretty good about. The rest of it, even though it does fit the picture, it is probably, I would have liked to have more time, but I think it was probably, I doubt it was longer than a week or two that I had to score it. I'm not even sure it was that long, to be honest, because we would have, to make the December 1989 release date, we would have had to have everything probably sent out the month prior, or even more probably, because they had, then they would have to take that sound mix, put it on the video master, and then make dubs and ship them. So probably it was even October maybe, but so it wasn't a lot of time. We didn't shoot the stuff with Burt Ward and Scott Spiegel and Linnea Quigley. That was shot in LA, and I want to say that was in July. So it wasn't until like August, September that I even finished the edit on the movie. So that tells you the narrow amount of time that we had to throw together the sound mix and everything.
So the shooting was like 1 month, or
I think it was about 2 weeks, 2.5 weeks.
Oh,
something like that. We had maybe a day off in between there, but it was, that sounds luxurious compared to some of the, years later, I would go on to make movies for Full Moon where we were shooting things in 5 days or 6 days or whatever. But we were, the problem with the shooting was so much of the movie takes place at night. So, which meant that then we were shooting at night. Some of the stuff like where the comic book artist is in his apartment, we could just block out windows and that stuff could be shot during the day. But once we got past that, everything else was at night. So we were all staying up all night. And I don't think anybody maybe does their best work in the middle of the night when you're supposed to be sleeping. So,
and that drives me to another question that I was, because I thought that you were older when you filmed this movie. So how was the financial thing there? Like, you were living with your parents, you were working. How was because you had to.
I had a job just prior to that. I was doing film to video transfers at a photo store. People would bring in their Super 8 home movies or whatever, and I was the guy that would transfer them for them. And I quit that job to work on this. Now, at the time, yes, I was living in my bedroom in the house that I had grew up in, and I didn't have the overhead that a lot of people have. So I think I got paid. I think my deal on that movie was Dave Dakota was going to pay me $2,500, and it was like $100 a week over 25 weeks, because we figured there was a 25-week schedule to make the movie. So, which doesn't sound like a lot of money, and it's not. But at the time, I really had no bills. I had no, I didn't really have a life. I was living upstairs of my mother's house, so that that was fine with me. To me, I didn't really get paid anything for my first film. Because of the way it was made. So I thought, well, this is an upgrade, so I was more than willing to do it, and I could afford to do it. That's the thing. So, but yeah, I lived modestly. So I'd actually, that movie afforded me the opportunity to get a car, so that I had a newer car, because at the time I just had a terrible car that was falling apart.
So finally, Robot had a return on the investment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know how it did for Cinema Home Video. I was a partner in when they released it. Cinema Home Video released it here in the United States, and there was a company called Film Trust that released it overseas. And obviously, they, just by the amount of places they licensed it to, I think somebody must have made some money. I never saw any of that money, even though I technically had points on the back end. But it wasn't until I reclaimed the rights to it years later, and then especially when once I restored it, that any financial stake that I had came back. So all those intervening years, I really saw nothing from it, other than I would get so many, like maybe 100 VHS copies at the time, and I could, then I could sell those or take them to conventions or whatever. So financially, it was not like a home run for me. It wasn't, until later. So.
No, but this movie has like this emotional background for I would say even if it was in 2010 and 2011, like 21 years later, 22 actually, for my group of friends back then in high school, and I have to say it because now we are paying like a tribute to the movie, to what sense the movie made after 20 years. um we got we watched that movie like twice, like twice per month, and we did a comic book. We did a short movie for an art
Wow.
project in high school. So it had this feeling for us. And I have to ask, what happened with Good Night? That I hope I'm pronouncing it well, but it's Bogdan Pekic. I guess.
Pesic, yeah. Don Pesic is how we called him, yeah. Don.
What
he
happened
still with him as an actor? You mean, or
with him as an actor and his personal life? Because we love Good Night here.
Oh, no, as far as I know, I have not heard. I haven't talked to him in a number of years, but he's still with us, and still healthy and well, still living in the same place that he lived back then. I went. I'm trying to remember what year that was. Probably 1999. I had gone around and done interviews with everybody, thinking at some point that I was going to release the movie, and we talked about all the movies. I mean, Don actually was in a couple of the movies that I made after Robot Ninja. He was in, had a little cameo in Zombie Cop, and he had a cameo in, he was a host of the thing I did called Basic How to Halloween Makeup. So we did other stuff after those movies as well. But yeah, no, I mean, he's still very much with us. So I think he also was in something else, Ozone. I can't remember what it was. There was something else that we did together years later, but he kind of just, retired. He was a school teacher and a soccer coach, I want to say, in real life. So he eventually retired and just, enjoyed out the rest of his years that way. So.
Yes, well, this is like a spoiler alert, but like the phrase like good night, and shooting, that is.
I got teased a lot for that line, but I just thought, well, you know what, I just thought that was funny. So, sometimes you put those things in where you don't really, that's the thing, you don't really think about it a lot. It's just like, well, it's a good line, I'll just but if it's funny, then that's fine too. As long as somebody, I've always been of the belief with all these movies, I take the movies very seriously. I don't take myself very seriously. So I have a weird sense of humor. So things that I find funny, maybe other people won't, but I'm always like, it doesn't really matter what reaction people have to it. If they laugh, if they cry, if they violently hate it, I mean, that's fine too. It's as long as you have some kind of reaction to the project, to the movie, then I'm okay with it. It's okay. Nobody makes fun of the movies more than I do. Anyways, I'm constantly like, I pick on my own movies worse than anybody could ever pick on them. Making fun of them.
Yeah, yes, because we were like days saying good night in Argentina.
It was a catchphrase, right? Yeah. Oh, it's great. I mean, well, I should ask you a question. What was it? What do you think it was that appealed to you and your friends about the movie? Because maybe I don't maybe get it because I'm too close to it, but there must be something that.
Yes, maybe because we had like 17 or 18 years old, and we were like, it was like coming of age, let's say, in a sense. So we were listening to new music, like we were listening like Fate No More, like Mr. Bungle, all of that, John Zorn, all of that weird music for us. And for me, I was listening to Wall of Voodoo and Thomas Dolby and Kaja Gugu and all of stuff
Very
No.
good taste. Yeah. Yeah. It sounds like we're on the
So,
same page of music.
and I was reading this heavy metal magazine that was called Headbangers, and it had always like tiny reviews of movies that are heavy metal related by I don't know what, but it was Robot Ninja, and it was like you have to drink like 8 tons of beer to watch it, but it's hilarious as a shit. Let's say it was very vulgar, like
Sure.
in the review. So I wanted that movie, and we got with a group of friends. There was this streaming service or that was Mega Upload, or I don't know.
Yeah, sure.
It doesn't exist anymore, and it was Mega Video, and it was uploaded the VHS version in Spanish, and we got caught up with that like for 2 months. Like say I would say and it was different groups of friends that we were watching it because we were in the same transition of being teenagers to become like some adults, let's say, and it has that atmosphere of transition, actually, like being like a B movie trying to be like a serious movie.
Right.
So like it grow up on us, and we are still laughing at it. We're still what I mean, watching it, having the phrases, all of that, and it's still having some sense for us. So I will say that that is the explanation. I don't know what other personal stories do you know that can explain this fan base for Robot Ninja across the world. I don't know, and that is my question. I don't know what other biographies, what other personal stories do you know that would explain this Robot Ninja fascination that exists.
I think it's what you just said. I mean, a lot of it is you're at an impressionable age at the right time. You know, you have to see it in the right window of time for it to really. I mean, and I get it because I was the same way with the movies that I love even to this day. You know, I saw them at the right age. You know what I mean? That's the thing. It's like if I had seen it a few years later or a few years earlier, you know, whatever movie I'm referring to, but you might not feel the same way about it. So, but once it latches onto you, you know, I get it. I have many movies that I've seen over the years that have stuck with me like that. So I understand for sure. I can't say what the appeal of Robot Ninja is necessarily, other than, you know, it like I said, it's a different kind of movie. It's different than anything I've made. It's different than most of the movies that you see. It's such a weird. The one thing that I always was cursed me about it is that it's so all over the place in tone, because one minute it's like really dark, and then you got all this silly stuff with Scott Spiegel and Burt Ward and Linnea wedged in there. And that was done purposefully, because when I realized that we were going to have this scene done, it could have been any scene I wanted, but I tried to put some more humor into it, like the intentional humor that to just sort of lighten the tone, because it was just getting, when I did the first cut of it, I'm like, this is really dark. Maybe we need to have a little bit of levity, you know, to the proceedings. So that was kind of the intention there.
Like this scene with the cap. Once I thought I was wrong, but I was mistaken. That
Right.
is.
And that's
that is
from Dead Next Door. It's the exact same prop that he
yes,
wore in
you know, yeah.
That was a friend of mine who was originally helping produce Dead Next Door who told me that phrase. We were schoolmates, and he didn't last all the way through the movie, but I credit him with that, because when he told me that, I was like, oh, that's great. That would be perfect for the Dr. Molson character. And then of course, you know, the same actor went on to play Dr. Goodnight, and I always drop little things like that. And somebody called it now that it's the Tempe cinematic universe or whatever. Like all the movies are connected in some weird way. If you watch all my, you know, especially the early stuff that I did, there's all these little, like you said, Easter eggs, you know, that throwbacks to other movies, whether it's a prop in the background or whatever. So, you know, I didn't really think about it at the time, but I guess I was doing the Marvel thing before Marvel got to it. I don't know.
Yeah, and actually, well, that phrase is very similar to another phrase that has it's a totally different series, and it's called it's a Mexican series that is a classic in Argentina. It was you could see it like in the morning or by night or any time. It was El Chavo del Ocho. I don't know if that was in the US. I don't think it made it, but
Doesn't
it,
sound
it
familiar
is
now.
huge. It is huge. It's like The Simpsons but in Mexican, and
Hmm.
and there's a teacher actually like Good Night in the real life that says the same phrase. Once I thought that I was wrong, but I was
Really?
mistaken.
That's
Yeah,
funny.
yeah. It's
Yeah, 'cause
called
I don't know I don't know what the origin of that phrase was. I don't know where my friend got it from, but it used to frustrate people because I remember when Dead Next Door was released on VHS and even Robot Ninja, you couldn't quite make it out. Like people would go, "What does this hat say?" It was driving me crazy. I never really thought about it when I did it. It's like, oh yeah, that's going to make people nuts if they can't figure out. Of course, now, in the HD days, it's pretty clear what it says. So. But yeah, it's so funny because you wonder, if somebody else is using that phrase, where did they come up? Where did they get it from? It existed
yeah.
obviously before I used it, but it's not a common phrase. You don't hear it all the time. So I love
And
to know the
even
origin.
and it is in a different language. It is in a
Yeah,
different plot.
which is funny.
And well, this character is called El Profesor Girafales. It doesn't have any translation like the teacher, like giraffe teachers, something like that. No, it doesn't have any translation. But keeping the memories, what happened with Miller? What happened with Michael Todd after Robot Ninja? I know he made some movies, but what happened with him that we keep loving him after Robot
I
Ninja? So
just
what
saw
happened?
Michael Todd a couple of weeks ago. There was a Friday the 13th screening of The Dead Next Door in downtown Akron, and he was there. So we did a little question and answer thing after. But Mike went on to. We had originally cast him as Fink, the Scott Spiegel character that Scott Spiegel would play in Skinned Alive, and there was some disagreements with him and the director and some scheduling problems, so he left that movie, and then Scott Spiegel stepped into that role. But we stayed in touch over the years. I mean, you're connected by the first two movies that you made, but he eventually moved to Hollywood, and he was doing he made a career for a long time out of playing characters that were under a ton of makeup, and he loved doing that. I mean, he got that from the first two movies that we did together. So he did that. He was on was it Deep Space Nine and all these different shows. I mean, for years he was doing that, and then eventually I think he moved somewhere in the North or South Carolina or whatever. He made his way back to Ohio more recently, so he's still around. He's not really doing anything in the business that I'm aware of right now, but he's still, his memories are very fond about all that stuff. He's still in good health and everything else. So maybe we'll get him out of retirement and do something one of these days.
And something that I keep on thinking that well, you mentioned that you gave like another direction, another guiding to the original screenplay maybe. So what was the original idea, and what did you made it to do the transformation to what the Robot Ninja finally made to
I think the biggest difference between the original script and what we wound up shooting, originally almost all the action took place in this one town square, and we did that for logistical reasons, thinking it would just be easier. I mean, so whenever the gangs would fight, it was in the middle of the night in this town square or whatever, so we weren't moving around as much. And the city where I wanted to shoot, my father was a police officer for many years, and we had shot many other things there. It's this small village called Mogador, and for whatever reason, the mayor decided he didn't want us there, and it didn't want us to do it because it was the middle of the night. We had to pay for police officers anyways to come, to use the car and all that kind of stuff. But so when that happened, we didn't have a lot of time to look for somewhere else. So I basically had to just figure out how to play those scenes in a different place, you know, in different locations. So then it became like the video store, and there was a shopping plaza across the street. We went to another small town called Lakemore, and they were more agreeable to it. And Lakemore was literally up the street from where my mother's house was, where I grew up anyway. So it was fine, but it changed it a little bit because I think the Robot Ninja of the first draft of the script was more like skulking around on rooftops. It was probably a little more Batman than what it eventually became. You know, he lost some of his mystique or power, I guess, because he was just a guy driving this Trans Am around, and you know what I mean. But that made it more realistic too. It's like, you know, how does a guy who's not really, he doesn't have any superpowers, how does he get around? Well, he's gonna have to drive his car, you know, or walk or whatever, ride a bike, you know, whatever the thing is. So that was probably the biggest change. But I mean, because of the time of the schedule, like I said, I think we made the deal in March of 1989, and we were shooting the first 2 weeks of June. There just wasn't time to really flesh it out. So once I did that first script in a couple, 2.5, 3 days, then I only had time to go back and do one more version, and that was more of a logistical thing, just to like, how are we gonna, okay, now we're not playing these in the town square, so where are these scenes going to take place? And once we figured out what locations we had at our disposal, but I think actually that benefited the movie to some degree. Like the video store scene, you know, that was not originally set in a video store, if I recall. It was somewhere else, but that kind of makes it a very unique thing from that era. You know what I mean? That they went into a real video store with VHS, you know, all these VHS tapes of the era and of the day, and everybody's got the stonewashed jeans and the cars. I mean, you couldn't fake it, really. I mean, it's 1980. It was shot and made in 1989, and it looks like it. I mean, that was the thing. So, yeah. So I mean, it was just because, you know, the vision I originally had for it was a little bit bigger and maybe more traditionally comic book, I guess. Although at the time, you got to remember, there were very few comic book movies made. You know, there was a TV series, there was the Punisher movie, I think, was out at that point. I didn't have a model so much. You know, this was all before Tim Burton's Batman came out. All we had was little snippets and a few pictures. Nobody had any idea of what Tim Burton's Batman was going to be. Maybe mine original script was probably tailored more to that, you know, from what I had seen from Batman. I was trying to go for that, but then I was forced to not go in that direction. So then it became its own thing, I guess, which probably
in the movie, Fatman is mentioned, but in the TV series, like the 1960s TV series.
Well, that's what I grew up. I mean, I didn't see it. I was born in 1966, so I didn't see it originally when I was a baby, but I saw it in syndication, and I was obsessed with that show. I mean, I would run home to watch the you know, when it was on. So it was very much an influence in, you know, that because it made sense that the comic book publisher and the TV producers were trying to make his very dark, serious character into something that was silly like that, to make it more palatable for, you know, I like that approach to it. And to me, it was a nod to that series that I grew up with. And of course, then to have Burt Ward come in and play the comic book publisher was just sort of the icing on the cake to that.
And well, moving like a little bit to the present, you said that 5 years ago or six years ago, you found out the negatives and you released a Blu-ray. But before doing that, you have to be aware that there's a market, that there's a market for that there's an audience. So what made you realize that you were going to that this release was going to be a success? That you were in touch with fans, you saw like good comments, you saw that it became like a cult movie, movie. What happened in the middle?
No, I mean, I definitely saw that there was interest. I mean, as services like Instagram became popular, I constantly would see people posting their, you know, there's tons of VHS collectors that post like their you know, pictures of their cherished possessions. And Robot Ninja was so many times I saw people post pictures of their Robot Ninja VHS. It was just amazing to me. I'm like, oh my gosh, people remember this thing. More than my other movies, really. I mean, it was that one was very, so I knew there was a kind of a core audience of those kind of guys that were into it. I'll be honest though, once I got the negative back in my hands and spent the money to have it 2K film scanned out of it, I was really doing it for myself because I wasn't sure that anybody was going to want to buy it. And, I didn't necessarily care. We raised a little bit of money on Indiegogo to kind of get the process started. So I knew based on that there was, some interest. There was going to be some people that were going to get it. But once I saw what the film scan looked like, because you're coming straight from the cut negative, which is like right out of the camera, and it's super clean. It's been sitting in storage. It was just like pristine condition. I was floored because I had forgotten what it looked like. I had only never seen a work print or whatever. I had an answer print of the movie, which is basically what they made the transfer that was released on VHS from, but they had done some horrible things to it. It was like all the stuff that was dark, they had timed it all the way down. They had washed all the color out of it. I think the lab, because I didn't supervise it, I didn't go to California to supervise it. I don't think they knew what to do. So they would see these scenes with all this blue and yellow and all this lighting scheme, and they thought, oh, we got to just tune all this out because it's not supposed to be in there. And it's like, no, it's supposed to be a comic book movie, and that's what that was the whole idea. I mean, really, it's especially considering we would always shoot these movies at night, and we never had proper light, to do it. We never had, there's always like the people in the foreground are lit, and then it just kind of falls off in the background. That was always, our early movies had that problem a lot, but we used to make fun of Mike Tolochko, who was the cinematographer, the first 3 movies that I made. We called him the Prince of Darkness because it was everything always wound up being so dark. Well, here, it turns out it wasn't him at all. He did his job. It was correct. And you look at the negative, he exposed the film properly, and the information was all there. It was how it was being finished that was wrong. So to answer your question, once I had paid for the film scan, I was doing it for myself first and foremost. I was like, this is my opportunity to do this the right way. Now, that said, the lab had messed up the sound mix, so I just threw it out, and I thankfully had copies of all the original elements, and most of those I threw out. I rebuilt everything as far as the sound mix goes. I mean, there's very few original sound effects that survived. I brought everything up to modern standards. I spent an entire summer just rebuilding the sound and doing this 5.1 surround mix. I mean, it's a really amazing, I think audio wise, that's the best sound mix I'd ever done. Trying to, of course, be faithful to the movie. I mean, I did make little changes here and there because I just, things that could be bigger or more powerful or whatever. But it became a pet project and really an obsession. I spent months because even though the film was in good condition, there was still cleanup work that had to be done. There was, you have to go through and tediously, remove all the specks and the dirt, and there were some chemical stains. The negative had been mishandled when it was put together. There's one scene where Leonard Miller's talking to the Dr. Goodnight, and there's somebody put the negative cutter put dissolves in the middle of the scene, which weren't supposed to be there. It's in all the VHS versions. And it drove me nuts for years. I was like, that was the first thing that was like very satisfying to fix that, because I was like, okay, now this looks, the way I wanted it, so but that was it, just to bring the movie to modern specifications, but also to whatever was there, embellish it so that it can look and sound its best, and to make a movie that I can say that I was proud of, because was not an easy thing for me to disown a movie. I was like, I still put all that effort and time, even though it was a shorter amount of time, between March and December of 1989, let's say that's most of that year I spent just on that movie. So it never sat right with me that I just turned my back on it. But that was it. I did it for myself, and I thought, well, if anybody else enjoys this movie, then they're going to benefit from it too. And I knew there was at least, we did 1,000 we pressed 1,000 discs for the first pressing, which was this ultimate edition that had the VHS version on a second disc and had all these extras. I went and took all these interviews that I had done and made this. It's basically a feature-length documentary called Unmasked, where everybody's, dissing the movie and speaking ill of the movie because that was their memory of, that it turned out so awful. And but put it in the perspective, and there was perspective from fans of the movie too, that, so it was a very well balanced documentary, but that was on the disc as well. So then then I sort of made, like I said, made my peace with it, and now, embrace it as, I think it's actually one of my more interesting movies, because it's very, I keep using the word unique, but I think it's more original than a lot of the other movies that I made, in terms of, it stands alone. You can't really look at it and say, well, that was inspired by this, this, and this. I mean, there are scenes, of course, but the overall story, Dead Next Door obviously was inspired by George Romero, no doubt, and I would never deny it in a million years. It just, Robot Ninja is a movie that is harder to define, I guess. So there you go.
And you had the redemption, and you had the success, but like the closing end for this podcast, what happened to J.R. Bookwalter and Tempe Video after Robot Ninja?
Well, I was very busy through the 90s and into the 2000s. I mean, like I said, immediately after Robot Ninja was shot and edited, we went into a movie called Skinned Alive and another movie called Ghoul School. And after that kind of ended my association with Cinema Home Video at the time. And then I moved to California, tried to get some stuff going on my own, wound up coming back to Cinema Home Video. I made 6 shot on video movies, which I lovingly call the SOV 6-pack, because it was 6 movies made in 7 months. And that was a humiliating experience as well. But that led me back to, I figured I'd give myself one more shot doing it the way I wanted to do it. And that led to Ozone, which was shot in 1993. It came out in 94. And that was sort of a redemption movie for me, because it erased the sins of the stuff that I had done prior to that, because I did it the way I wanted to. We didn't have a lot of money, but we had time, and I kind of made it right. So then that kind of launched me into another phase of my career. I made Polymorph and The Sandman after that, or The Sandman and Polymorph and Bloodletting. And then I moved to California and wound up getting involved with Full Moon. I worked for them for 5 years, doing post-production, and then eventually that led back to directing again. I directed Witch House 2 and 3, produced a whole bunch of other movies for them. And then I kind of just, I had a not great experience on a movie called Stingers. It was shot as Stingers. Now it's called Mega Scorpions, I think is what they call it on their streaming platform. But that kind of made me question again why I was doing this. And, it was not the kind of movie that I got into the business to make in the first place. So I took some time off, and that time off led me to have family, and led me back into distribution. And now I have a mail order outfit called MakeFlix, where I'm selling all of my movies and the work of other people, including Fred Olin Ray, and Dave Sterling, and a bunch of other guys. So we're trying to create a place where we can sell independent works from the stuff that we like to a worldwide audience, I guess, without, where you don't have to go to Amazon or all these places that are not independent friendly, which I'm sure you've heard a lot of. I know you talked to Lloyd Kaufman recently, and I'm sure he gave you that spiel as well.
Yes. Actually, I was relating your project with Lloyd Kaufman's Trauma, and now with the Trauma Now experience, that is like a Netflix or Amazon for this independent movie. So it's like is how you have to the strategy to survive in the industry. Like, we are doing this podcast because I don't know how it is in the US, but in Argentina, basically the TV, nobody watches the TV now. It's only on YouTube and all that, except for politics. So you have to survive in a sense, and this podcast and this series is about that. So we have to make our own strategies to survive in the industry.
Yeah, I mean, streaming is great and not great at the same time, because it's great because it makes it accessible to so many more people, but it's economically it's not, you know, I mean, whether it's ad supported, I mean, it's so easy. Like Robot Ninja is one of those movies that I constantly have to have pulled off of YouTube because people just post the entire movie up there. And the funny thing is it's available legally on YouTube, but you know, on Google Play and on Vudu and on all these services, iTunes and all that. But it's just, you know, it's one of those movies that people, I don't know if it's because people like it and they just want other people to see it, but that's the only thing that is a problem for me, is that people post it, you know, online, the entire movie online. I'm fine with people posting their favorite scenes or any of that kind of stuff, but it makes it hard to make a living at any of this stuff if, you know, if with the stuff online. So that's why services like Tubi make it easier, because it's ad supported. You know, they don't pay you anything up front, but you're getting paid something from people watching it, if anybody watches it. It's just, you know, back in the VHS days, it was a lot easier because you get X number of dollars for a VHS tape and you could make, you know, a living with that. Or, you know, even if it's not it might be a modest living, but it's still living. With streaming, that's very difficult to do. And that was part of my motivation for making MakeFlix, is because there's a small but very loyal core audience of collectors who still want to own movies on Blu-ray, so, and maybe DVD to some degree. But so we're catering to that crowd, but also doing the streaming at the same time. If, you know, if somebody wants to see it on streaming, it's available. If somebody wants to own it, that's available too. And, you know, there's no pressure either way. As long as people are watching this stuff, I'm fine with it. That's, you know, that's all that matters.
So in the closing credits from this dialogue, well, you have to do what every guest do. That is, recommend a movie that maybe inspired you, maybe was a before and after in your life, or maybe something that you're watching, and that is for YouTube. But for Spotify, you have to recommend a song. So
Wow.
be my guest.
Putting me on the spot here. Gosh, well, I'll tell you this, for the Spotify, that one's probably a little bit easier. I actually have two recommendations. The first one is, and these are, again, I'm dating myself because these are both older bands, but Men Without Hats is a Canadian band that's popular for safety dance. They have a new album and I love it. So I would recommend anybody. It's called Again Part 2. There was an EP a few months ago that came before it that was cover songs, but any track on either one of those are definitely worth a listen. And Andy Preboy, who was the second vocalist for Wall of Voodoo, has a new album out that is basically songs that he abandoned and never finished, and that he went back and finished. And there's a lot of great stuff on that too. I'm trying to think of the one song is One and One It Makes Three, I think is the name of the album, but that's probably my favorite track off of that. So, and that was actually originally intended to be a Wall of Voodoo song. So there you go. That's my.
So you like the post standard way period of Wall of Voodoo?
I like them both equally, and it's weird because I actually, when I lived in California, I used to hang out with Stan Ridgway. I would go to his house, and you know, we would talk. He actually let me use one of his Drywall songs for the Polymorph trailer originally in 1996. And then when I moved back out there, we would get together for dinner or whatever, just hang out and talk about stuff. He's a guy that was like, I always remember his advice to me, because we would talk, we had very similar sensibilities in that we like to do things ourselves. And he's like, well, you know, JR, at some point you can't do everything yourself. What are you going to do? Make your own clothes? And I'm like, well, no, I guess I draw the line at that. But you know, I just thought that was so Stan Ridgway. But I like them both. I like them both. I like Stan Ridgway and I like Andy Preboy. And you know, I know there was.
But I guess that
there originally, but.
No, but I guess that Stan still hates the idea of returning to Wall of Voodoo, maybe for one gig even.
Well, I saw him. He played in Cleveland a few years back. Maybe this was probably more like 12 years ago now. But he actually played a bunch of it wasn't an official Wall of Voodoo thing, but he was playing a lot of Wall of Voodoo songs and kind of embracing it. So I think maybe he's softened on that over the years. But I get it. I mean, he's the one. He chose to leave that band, so I think he was he was probably mortified when they continued it because he probably didn't expect that they would continue.
After 40 years, you have to become softer. You have to become like more soft with something. So you know, so yeah, it was 40 years back.
The thing is, they're very different bands. You know, depending on who the Stan stuff is very different than the Andy Preboy stuff. But I like it both. I mean, there's a similarity in the sound because you got some of the same performers, but they both have their own interesting way to spin a yarn, I guess, to tell a story, and that I liked. So I don't know. That's my, as far as gosh, I don't know.
Movies.
As far as movie. See, it's tough for me because I these days I think I watch more TV shows, and when I say TV, I mean streaming stuff. But trying to think. Well, I mean, if I can recommend a TV show, well, gosh, what is the name of it now? For All Mankind, I think, on Apple TV Plus. Man, that show blew me away, especially the second season. I know where you want a movie, so I got to think of a movie, but I watch a lot more. Probably it's easier for me because I have kids and stuff. It's just I'm busy. It's harder for me to sit down and watch, a 2-hour movie. I enjoyed the Batman. I mean, that was probably the most recent thing I saw that I dug in the theater. But if you're looking for something more obscure, gosh, that's a tough one. I know there's something. The last movie I remember really being impacted by, and this has been a number of years, but there was a movie called The Road about, was it Viggo Mortensen, I think, where he's going through this wasteland with his child. And I think because I had a son at that point and who was similar age, that one really just kind of hit me like, wow, that's just, I haven't seen it since then. I need to watch it again, but I guess that would be the one that I would go back to.
Well, that will be the recommendation. But this is Saturday, 28th of May. It's not going to be released today. It depends of my editions and the schedule of Diálogos. But 2 days ago, Ray Liotta passed away, and Ray Liotta made a huge impact on, I believe, in every movie lover, let's say. So we can recommend like a movie from Ray Liotta as well. So
Something Wild. That was the first thing I saw him in. He blew me away in that movie. I couldn't believe it. I mean, the whole movie is excellent, but his performance was just, I didn't see it coming. You know what I mean? You knew he was kind of a dark, edgy character, but that ending was just like, pow, like I saw it in the theater originally, and just, that was talk about seeing a movie at the right age at the right time. That was a very influential movie for me. So Something Wild would be my Ray Liotta recommendation.
So thank you, JR, for your time. Thank you for talking about these all movies that made a huge impact on us, and thank you for talking about your career. So I hope it was a good dialogue for you.
Absolutely, yeah, and thanks for having me. It'll be an interesting bookend to our earlier conversation, because I'm sure I haven't seen that in a long time. I'm sure that was I was less than favorable about it. So it's
yeah,
you can see it's almost like a two-faced thing. I'm like, then and now. So and we're talking about the same movie.
Yeah, exactly. So, soy Facundo Guadaño, esto fue otro episodio de Diálogos y nos vemos en la siguiente emisión.